She didn't just walk away. She tore through everything you built, your trust, your vulnerability, your loyalty, and acted like none of it mattered. She smiled while you shattered. She moved on while you couldn't breathe, and that's exactly what she wanted. She expected you to spiral, to drown in desperation, to call, to text, to beg. She thought she would be the ghost haunting your nights while she slept peacefully in someone else's arms. But what she never saw coming was your silence. Not silence out of weakness, not silence because you're broken, silence because you're done playing her game. You walked away, not because you lost, but because you finally understood your worth. And now, her ego is starving. You didn't crumble, you didn't beg, you vanished. And in that absence, her illusion starts to rot. She thought you'd break, but you're about to build a life so untouchable, she won't even recognize the man she left behind. You're not here by accident. You're here because something inside you is tired of being disrespected, misunderstood, underestimated. That ends now. I'm putting together the most powerful relationship guide ever written for men, the Stoic Relationship Blueprint, a map to rebuilding your identity, your value, your masculinity, in a world that wants to strip it from you. If you keep trying to navigate this modern chaos without it, the cost isn't just emotional, it's your peace, your power, your future. And I refuse to let another man fall while searching for answers in the dark. Stay tuned for this life-changing ebook. Comment, "I choose power," if you're ready to stop bleeding for someone who never deserved your loyalty. Number 1. Silence is your weapon. You've probably lived through it already. The moment she turns cold, says she needs space, or worse, disappears completely with someone new already lined up in the background. You stand there, frozen in disbelief, trying to make sense of the fragments, replaying every conversation, every text, every memory that once held so much weight. You ask yourself if you were too much or not enough. You wonder how someone who swore you were everything could detach so easily. That confusion, that pain, she knows it well. She counted on it. Because the more disoriented you are, the more control she retains over your narrative. And most men fall into the trap. They chase, they question, they beg for answers. They write long paragraphs that go unread. They post thinly veiled pain online. They linger in mutual spaces, hoping for a glance, a moment, some sign that they still matter. But let me ask you something. What does that actually win you? Validation from someone who walked away when you were all in? Recognition from someone who turned your vulnerability into an exit ramp? The truth is, reacting is currency. And every time you react, you deposit value into her ego. You say, "You still control how I feel." And that is the exact opposite of power. But when you don't chase, when you don't reach out, when you don't give her any reaction, something remarkable happens. She's left alone with the silence she orchestrated, not the kind that's quiet, but the kind that deafens, the kind that echoes questions she never prepared for. Did he really care? Why hasn't he said anything? Was I not as important as I thought? That mental spiral, that's where your power begins to rebuild. Not by trying to be heard, but by becoming untouchable. You see, power doesn't always come from action. Often, it's the refusal to act that communicates strength in a language louder than words. When you walk away and don't explain, when you take all your attention, love, energy, and emotion and redirect it inward, you are doing what Stoics have always preached, mastering what is within your control and releasing what isn't. One wrote, "It is not that things disturb us, but our interpretation of them." If you interpret her departure as rejection, you will suffer. But if you see it as redirection, as the moment life pointed you back to yourself, Then you awaken. And this awakening is not rage-fueled, not passive-aggressive. It is quiet, confident, and immovable. You begin to read books, build your body, build your business, walk taller, breathe slower. You no longer crave closure because you found clarity. You no longer replay her words because they no longer define you. And when she finally checks your profile and finds nothing, no pain, no reaction, no trace of need, she feels a disturbance. She was supposed to be unforgettable, but now she is erased, not from memory, but from mattering. And that, more than any speech, any tearful confrontation, any confession, is how you reclaim your soul, not through revenge, but through quiet self-mastery. You didn't disappear because you were broken. You disappeared because you understood. You were never supposed to beg for a place in someone's life. You were supposed to build a life so full, so rich, so driven, that anyone who couldn't see your value becomes a shadow in the light of your evolution. Number 2, ego collapse starts in quiet. When she left, she expected pain. She expected questions. She expected you to send that "I miss you" text at 1:27 a.m. She expected to see her name light up on your screen, expected indirect stories, expected to feel your desperation. This isn't always a conscious strategy, but it is a psychological rhythm. She believes that your heartbreak is proof of her impact, that the weight of your reaction equals the depth of her worth. And that's the dangerous lie that fuels ego. It turns relationships into battlegrounds for control, not love. But what happens when the echo she counted on doesn't come? What happens when she checks her phone and finds nothing? When she walks past the places you used to go and you're nowhere to be found? When her friends tell her you haven't asked about her, haven't brought her up once, haven't posted a single thing that hints at missing her? Her ego, once inflated by expectation, begins to puncture, because the script is off. She thought she'd be haunted. Instead, she's confused, and confusion is the seed of doubt. Doubt leads to reflection, and reflection, real, unfiltered reflection, is rare for people who are used to being chased. But now, in the quiet she never anticipated, she hears her own thoughts, and they start turning against her. She starts to remember how much you did, how much you gave, how you never flinched in your loyalty. She remembers the nights you stayed up just to calm her down, the way you looked at her like she was sacred, the things you forgave that others would have punished. And slowly, the image she painted of herself as the victim, the one who outgrew you, starts to blur. In its place comes a realization she's not ready for. She walked away from something rare, and she might never be invited back. The mind, when left with nothing to feed it, starts to starve. And when it starves, it scavenges for truth. That truth is your gift to her, and your gift to yourself. Because in this quiet reversal, you teach her a lesson louder than any confrontation ever could, that you don't exist to complete anyone's ego story. You are not the fallback plan. You are not the emotional sponge. You are not the ghost who lingers. You are the man who built himself back in silence, not because he had to, but because he finally decided to stop offering his soul to people who couldn't hold it. Let the silence do what your words never could. Make her realize what she thought she discarded was the foundation she never deserved. Number 3, withholding your validation. Every time you text her after she's already turned her back, every time you look at her story, every time you reach out with "just checking on you" or "I still think about us," you are handing over a piece of your self-respect, like a man trying to buy back his place in her world with fragments of vulnerability. And the tragedy is that most men don't even see it as giving something away. They see it as trying to heal, to reconnect, to get closure. But all it does is tell her that even after the disrespect, even after the abandonment, she still owns the keys to your peace, and she keeps them hanging on her ego like trophies. Now think about this. Have you ever noticed how she responds when you don't reach out, when you don't react, when you don't engage? Confusion creeps in because the validation she expected is gone, and it's not just gone, it's extinct, and in its place is a question she can't answer. Did I never matter? Because the moment you stop validating her importance in your life, you remove the mirror that reflected back the image she wanted to believe about herself. Validation isn't always praise. Sometimes it's conflict, sometimes it's attention, sometimes it's the emotional energy of a man in pain. But when you cut that flow, she is forced to sit with herself, to wonder if she ever had real power, or if it was just your kindness, your loyalty, your heart that made her feel valuable. And when that supply ends, what she's left with isn't peace. It's panic, not because she wants you back, but because she wants to know she could still have you if she tried. And that's the lie she tells herself to keep her ego inflated. This is where most men fail. They try to reclaim dignity by explaining, hoping she'll see them differently. But dignity isn't explained, it's reclaimed, and that starts with withdrawal. Not because you're trying to manipulate, but because you've realized that your energy is no longer up for sale. And when you withhold your validation, you're not playing hard to get. You're stating loud and clear that your love is not a loyalty reward for people who failed to see its value the first time. And that shift, that invisible but powerful shift, is what begins to reset your identity in your own eyes. Ask yourself, when was the last time you were proud of how you responded to rejection? Not desperate, not emotional, not explosive, but proud. That's what this is about. Becoming the kind of man who is not just harder to get, but impossible to forget. Not because you clung harder, but because you let go with such unshakable self-worth that she has to spend the rest of her life wondering what kind of man walks away with nothing left to prove and everything left to build. Number 4, cut off her control. There's always a test, and it never comes as a grand gesture. It sneaks in through the ordinary. A song she posts that she knows you'll recognize, a sudden comment on your friend's picture, a hope you're okay message that lands in your inbox out of nowhere. And it's not what it looks like. It's not reconciliation. It's not regret. It's surveillance. It's her checking if she still has access. Because emotional control isn't about possession. It's about influence. And influence thrives on your openness, on your availability, on your willingness to still be affected by her shadow even after she's walked away. Now imagine this. You open that message and your heart races, because for a split second, you think maybe she misses you. Maybe she finally realized what she lost, and then she goes silent again. Or worse, you see her back with someone else the next day, and you spiral, because that little window she cracked open wasn't an invitation. It was a leash, and she was tugging it just to see if you'd still come running. And if you do, she knows you're still there, still orbiting her, still holding on. And that knowledge is the fuel her ego needs to keep pretending she was the one who had the power all along. That's why the block button exists, not out of immaturity, but as a boundary, as a statement that says, you don't get to tap into me whenever you feel like it. And this is the hard truth. If you leave doors open, she will walk through them not to return, but to remind you that she still can. And every time you allow that, you set yourself back weeks, months in your healing, because you're not just revisiting her, you're re-inviting the dynamic where she had the upper hand, where she could dictate the rhythm, where she controlled when you felt peace and when you felt pain. So what's the move? The move is removal, not as punishment, but as protection, not as drama, but as discipline, because freedom doesn't come from not caring. It comes from not being reachable by the person who taught you to doubt yourself. You cut the access because you finally understand that your heart isn't a revolving door for people who treat it like a convenience store. And when she realizes that she can no longer reach you, not even subtly, not even digitally, that's when the story changes. Because now she's no longer sure if she was the one who let go or the one who got let go of. And that reversal, that mental chaos, that sudden absence of control, that's where your healing accelerates. Because you are no longer waiting, watching, or wondering. You are rebuilding in private, rising in focus, moving forward without dragging her shadow behind you. And that choice, that clean break, is what makes you untouchable, not because she can't contact you, but because even if she could, you wouldn't answer anymore. Number 5. Break the cycle of emotional begging. Every time you reach out after she's broken you, every time you send that message saying, "I just want to talk," or "I need closure," you chip away at your own strength, not because you are weak, but because you were never taught that love, when authentic, never needs to be begged for. And what happens is that you begin to wear shame like a second skin, wondering if maybe if you had said it differently, if maybe this message will get through to her. But the truth that hurts and heals is this: when someone truly values you, they don't wait for you to beg to treat you with decency. They don't abandon you just to watch you crawl back. And this is where most men lose themselves. They confuse persistence with power, thinking that if they just hang on long enough, she'll come around. But what actually happens is the opposite. She begins to see your love not as rare, but as common, not as powerful, but as desperate, because attention without boundaries becomes noise, and noise is easily ignored. And every man must learn that there is no strength in clinging to a person who has already chosen to let go. No honor in reopening the door just because she knocked softly, especially when that knock comes only after she's explored every other option and found them lacking. And this cycle of giving, hoping, waiting, asking is not love. It is emotional addiction. And like all addictions, it consumes your dignity piece by piece, until all that's left is a man who cannot look in the mirror without questioning why he allowed someone to treat him as optional when he gave her the kind of loyalty that should have made her feel untouchable. Ask yourself, have you ever seen someone truly regret losing you while you were still making it easy to access you? The answer is always no. Because regret requires distance, it requires absence, it requires them facing the reality of life without you, and that cannot happen if you are still available, still responsive, still trying to explain how deeply you cared. The man who breaks the cycle of emotional begging doesn't do it because he stops loving. He does it because he starts respecting that love enough to protect it from being trampled on again, and that shift, from seeking closure to creating boundaries, is where your new story begins. Not a story of trying harder, but of letting go, walking away not with bitterness, but with the clear-eyed recognition that your value was never supposed to be proven to the one who was blind to it, but cultivated quietly until it becomes undeniable to the one truly worthy of it. You don't stop reaching out to hurt her. You stop because every time you do, you hurt yourself. And when you stop hurting yourself for the sake of being understood, you begin the sacred work of becoming the man who doesn't just survive heartbreak. He rises from it indestructible. Number 6. Replace her with purpose. There is a void left behind when she walks out, and most men try to fill that space with substitutes. Other women, endless scrolling, long nights spent staring at nothing. But what you must realize is that the space she occupied is sacred, not because of who she was, but because of what you allowed to grow in her presence. Your devotion, your protection, your dreams. And when she is gone, you must not let that energy scatter. You must harvest it, repurpose it, redirect it into something that transcends the relationship entirely, because the greatest tragedy is not her leaving. It is you losing yourself in the aftermath. And this is where the rebuilding begins, not by proving her wrong, but by proving yourself right, right about your potential, right about your ability to create, to grow, to rise, even after the most intimate form of betrayal. And this isn't a motivational slogan, this is a battle plan for your soul, because the moment you decide to replace her with purpose, you stop chasing memories and start building legacies. You stop looking back and start moving so far forward that your past becomes a footnote in the story of your rise. Think of this. Every hour you used to spend texting her, thinking of her, arguing, overthinking, planning, waiting. What if that energy was used to write a book, build a body, launch a business, study something that sets your spirit on fire? What if the pain she left you with became the fuel for a mission so big she wouldn't even recognize the man you've become a year from now? Purpose is not a distraction. It is a resurrection. And every great man who's ever faced destruction understood this. What you give your attention to grows, and if you keep feeding the pain, it multiplies. But if you starve it by flooding your life with meaningful direction, it withers, and you begin to live not in reaction to what she did, but in devotion to who you're becoming. When she checks on you, she should find not bitterness, not sadness, not a man who's still waiting. She should find a ghost, not because you vanished, but because you evolved into someone her former self no longer has access to, because you chose the path of purpose, and that path has no room for people who didn't believe in you when they had the chance. So start today, not with a dramatic announcement, but with quiet action. Start that journal, that side hustle, that fitness journey, that class, that hard conversation with yourself about who you want to be, and then execute day by day, breath by breath, until the man you're becoming makes the pain that started the journey worth it. Because nothing, and I mean nothing, heals like purpose. And when you find yours, you'll realize she was never the destination, just the spark that ignited your transformation. Number 7. Watch her chase your absence. The hardest part of walking away isn't the goodbye. It's the silence that follows, not the kind that surrounds you, but the kind that grows inside her when she realizes the one man she thought she could always get back is no longer within reach. And at first, she doesn't feel it. She's too distracted with attention, distractions, or temporary validation. But time doesn't keep secrets, and eventually her mind circles back to the man who vanished without a scream, the man who didn't plead, the man who didn't beg for another chance, and that absence begins to feel less like peace and more like punishment, not because you intended to hurt her, but because the space where you used to be is now a mirror, and in that mirror, she doesn't see the woman who was adored. She sees the one who ruined something rare, and this isn't about revenge, it's about presence, about the weight of losing something you didn't value until it was too late. Because when a woman expects you to crumble and you don't, when she expects you to fight and you stay calm, when she expects you to chase and instead you build, the emotional chaos that follows isn't yours anymore, it's hers. And that shift, that reversal, that inner unraveling begins quietly, first with curiosity, then confusion, and then full-blown emotional unease, when she realizes the emotional leash she thought she still held has turned into air, and now she's scrolling through your old messages, looking at your old photos, checking your name on every app to see if you're online, and suddenly the thought hits her. What if he really moved on? What if I was just a chapter, not the story? What if I made a mistake so big I'll never get another chance? And from there, the behaviors start. The vague posts meant for you, the mutual friends she reaches out to, the random likes from accounts you barely recognize. And you might wonder, is she really missing me, or is she missing the control she lost? And the answer doesn't even matter anymore, because the point is this: you no longer react, you no longer respond, not because you're trying to play games, but because you've upgraded so far beyond her version of you that her attention now feels like a distraction, not a reward. And in that clarity, you gain something no one can take from you again: emotional sovereignty, the ability to walk away from what you once thought you couldn't live without and never look back. And as she spirals into trying to recreate the attention, the validation, the adoration that used to pour from you like water, she starts to understand something brutal and transformative. She didn't just lose a man, she lost the version of herself that existed when she had access to you, because your presence made her feel significant, and now your absence forces her to face the truth about who she is without that reflection. And that truth stings deeper than any insult could, deeper than any message she thought she wanted from you, because it was never about getting you back. It was about confirming she still mattered, and now that she can't, she's left with a reality she never prepared for. The man who once lit up at her name now walks through life untouched by her shadow, and that, not your anger, not your sadness, is the real consequence of taking your love for granted, because nothing terrifies someone who feeds off attention more than becoming invisible to the one who once saw them as everything. The Stoic relationship blueprint is almost here. And it's not just an e-book. It's the manual for every man who's been burned, used, discarded, or emotionally gutted by the games of modern dating and society's expectations. It's for the man who wants more than survival, who wants to reclaim control, build purpose, master emotional resilience, and become the kind of man who doesn't chase, but attracts, who doesn't react, but creates, who doesn't fold, but builds a life so complete no one can break him again. If you're tired of guessing, tired of losing yourself, tired of being the one who cares more, fights more, bleeds more, then this blueprint is your answer. It's structured, real, raw, and unapologetically made for you. Comment "blueprint" if you're ready to transform your life and your relationships for good. No more repeating cycles, no more being lost in the pain. Your healing, your power, your future, it starts with this, and it's dropping very soon. Be one of the first to claim your copy and never lose yourself in anyone ever again. If this video resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.